Hi everybody, Dana Sparks, Director of the Real Estate Academy of America and qualifying broker of Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors. Continuing on with the series on the 2023 changes that the Georgia Association of Realtors has made to the contract package for 2023. I am recording this in December of 2022. Please check out our classes. The Real Estate Academy of America is offering a free 3-hour CE class called the 2023 GAR contract changes. We are teaching them virtually as well as in person, hosted by Maximum One Company offices throughout the entire state of Georgia. They are being taught by our instructors, our brokers, as well as our affiliated closing attorneys. So you'll want to make sure to attend a class to get further explanation and get a whole overview of all the changes for 2023. But today I am continuing on with this video series going over some of the changes. Please check out below when you click the playlist button. There is a playlist that is 2023 GAR contract. And there is also you'll see a button down here, somewhere down here, that says videos. If you click on that, you'll see a whole host of videos on all of the changes for 2023 GAR contract, as well as all the other videos that I've done over many years. So, but continuing on, I want to discuss the changes that the Georgia Association of Realtors has made throughout the purchase and sale agreement and the listing agreement and the buyer brokerage agreement, but the changes that they have addressed regarding the presence and potential hazard of the existence of lead-based paint. So there is nothing in any of the forms that is different conceptually. The GAR has just rearranged some of this information to make it a little bit more apparent, make these disclosures and make sure that buyers understand their rights with respect to lead-based paint and lead-based paint hazards in a property that they are considering purchasing. So we all know that they stopped using lead-based paint in 1978. So if a house was built prior to 1978, you absolutely are required to include a lead-based paint. The seller must include a lead-based paint disclosure. The buyer must get a copy of that lead-based paint disclosure form and the EPA's lead-based paint pamphlet prior to going under contract prior to going under contract for that property. Now, if there is something in the house or on the property that potentially could also have been painted prior to 1978, you should also use a lead-based paint disclosure, both on the listing side and on the buyer side, lead-based paint disclosure and this lead-based paint informational pamphlet. What would that be? That would be like an antique mantelpiece. Antique nowadays implies prior to 1978. Reclaimed barnwood that may or may not have been painted. Shiplap that was recovered from an older home. Anything like that. If there is a potential that anything in the house or the property had been exposed to or painted with paint prior to 1978, then there is a potential that does provide for a potential lead-based paint hazard. Buyers, you need to be aware of this. You need to be aware of what your rights are, and you need to be aware of this prior to going under contract. Sellers, you need to disclose this. Agents on both sides, y'all need to also be aware of all of these laws and disclose this. So now let me address the changes that GAR has made in 2023 regarding this information and these issues. Again, nothing new, just a little bit more teased out and more highlighted so our public is more aware of these issues and what's going on. So in the purchase and sale agreement, GAR F201, the purchase and sale agreement for residential property, They've actually redone the entire section on inspection and due diligence, and they've all that information is still there, but they've sort of teased it out a little bit to they've added some verbiage to clarify it, and they've teased out all that information into its own separate sub paragraphs. So this is in the GAR purchase and sale agreement under F201 under paragraph B8. 8 is the core. A8 is where the time frame for due diligence and all of that is negotiated between the buyer and the seller. And B8 is where it goes on and gives further information regarding inspections and due diligence, so forth and so on. So all of that whole entire section has been reworked a little bit with disclosure duties, obligations of the seller, inspection obligations of the buyer, so forth and so on. But specific to this conversation regarding lead-based paint, there is a brand new sub-paragraph in the purchase and sale B8E, lead-based paint hazard evaluation. And it states that if any portion of the property was built prior to 1978, the lead-based paint exhibit, and you agency helps you out with a reference to that exhibit number, it is GAR F316, is hereby attached as an exhibit to the agreement. Buyers shall have the right to conduct a lead hazard evaluation within 10 days from the binding agreement date or other mutually agreed upon time period, and to terminate, the buyer has the right to terminate the agreement without penalty, meaning they'll get their earnest money back, upon notice to the seller if lead-based paint and or lead-based paint hazards are found, unless these rights were waived by the buyer on the exhibit. If the lead-based paint exhibit gives the buyer the right to terminate the agreement, if lead-based paint or lead hazards are found on such and such notice of termination is not given within the 10 days or other mutually agreed upon time frame, then the right to terminate for lead-based paint or hazards shall be waived by the buyer. So that's where it is discussed in the actual purchase and sale agreement. In the seller brokerage agreement, again, this information has been there, but they've teased it out a little bit and created its own brand new separate standalone paragraph. So it is a new paragraph A7 in the seller brokerage agreements, looking at the exclusive one, which is F101. It says, lead-based paint disclosure. Federal law requires disclosure of lead paint in homes or residential properties or a portion thereof constructed to 1978. Select one below. Then there's an A or a B, and the seller checks A or B. A states, a dwelling on the property or portion thereof was constructed prior to 1978. Seller agrees to complete and provide the broker with a signed lead-based paint disclosure exhibit F316 at the same time as signing this agreement and is attached as an exhibit. Or no dwelling on the property or portion thereof was constructed prior to 1978. In other words, you listing agents, when you go on a listing, if the house or anything in the house potentially was built prior to 1978, the seller, when they sign the listing agreement or the seller brokerage agreement, also needs to sign this lead-based paint disclosure. Point of practice, bring a blank one with you anyway, in case as you're doing your walkthrough, they have an antique mantelpiece or shiplap or reclaimed barnwood or something along those lines. Additionally, it has in the corresponding paragraph, hang on, let me find that. That is under paragraph B7, which is the paragraph in the listing or the seller brokerage agreement F101 that corresponds to what I just reread. Again, it is just rearranged a little bit where the information about lead-based paint used to be in the paragraph where it talked about the seller's responsibility to complete the seller's property disclosure statement. Again, they just teased out the lead-based paint disclosure separately so it'll stand alone and stand out to our public sellers in this seller brokerage agreement. And it basically states the same thing that I just read, that as required by federal law, Residential Lead-Based Paint Hazard Reduction Act of 1992, Title 10, If any portion of a residential dwelling was built prior to 78, the lead-based paint disclosure exhibit F316 is hereby attached as an exhibit to this agreement. Term residential dwelling includes any painted fixture or material used therein that was built or manufactured prior to 78. Broker is hereby authorized to distribute any lead-based paint exhibit to the buyer or interested property. The lead-based paint exhibit in and of itself, 316, just as a reminder, this has not changed, but just as a reminder, it has a place where the seller discloses if they know of any lead-based paint on the house or any hazards in the house, or if they have no knowledge of it, and if there are any records or reports. That's the portion the seller completes. The buyer must acknowledge that they have received all information, if any was listed above, by the seller, or the buyer, and the buyer has received that pamphlet, Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home. That is an EPA pamphlet, and I'll give you those resources in just a moment where you can find that. Then on this is important for you agents working with buyers. Your buyers either agree to have the opportunity, a 10-day opportunity to conduct a risk assessment of the lead-based paint, or they choose to waive their opportunity to conduct that risk assessment for lead in the home. So that's really important that you buyers and sellers go through this with your public. And then there is an agent acknowledgement too, that you agents working with sellers, that you have informed them of their obligations under U.S. law to disclose any knowledge of lead-based paint. So this disclosure form can be found in GAR, and under in the GAR contract package, it's 316. This disclosure form is also in the RE contract package form, and it can also be found on the EPA's website, as well as the lead paint pamphlet. Now, additionally, I want to share with you other resources for you regarding lead-based paint. Again, federal law requires that before being obligated under a contract to buy a house built prior to 78, the buyer must receive the following from the home seller: the lead-based paint informational pamphlet and the lead-based paint disclosure. And in GAR, the pamphlet is CB04, lead-based paint pamphlet, CB13, protect yourself when buying a home, and the disclosure is there's a disclosure F319, disclosure information concerning lead upon transfer of residential property, and it cites the law. And the seller's disclosure regarding of lead-based paint in the property is the lead-based paint exhibit F316. And there is a separate one if you're working with leases, F918, lead-based paint exhibit for leases. The seller must make these available to a prospective buyer prior to entering into a contract. Seller must allow the buyer, if the buyer desires so, a 10-day risk assessment of lead-based paint. There are additional resources that you may go to, EPA being the main one, and if you go to epa.gov, you can find information there. In the state of Georgia, if you go to the Georgia Environmental Protection Division, there is a whole section about lead-based paint under that entity, as well as under the Georgia Department of Community Affairs. Additional information for lead-based paint disclosures and warnings to our buyers and our sellers. So just want to let you know, again, conceptually, there's really no new additional information. It is just brought more to the forefront of our sellers and our buyers so that they are aware of their obligations and responsibilities and duties and rights with respect to lead-based paint in a home and lead-based paint hazards. Thank you so much for watching. Dana Sparks, broker of Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors and director of the Real Estate Academy of America, satisfying your needs with service, innovation, and education. Bye. If you like that video, check out the one here. If you like the content on this entire channel, please click here to subscribe. I try to take even the most complicated of real estate situations and make them crystal clear. See what I did there? Real estate made crystal clear. Thank you guys so much for watching.